Hello everyone. Today our topic will be historical background of the Indian polity. Let's get started. Okay. Our content will be historical background, and today we will focus on the company rule. And in the next part, actually, it will be a lengthy video. So I'll convert this lengthy video in two parts. First, I will study the company rule, and then we will study the Crohn's rule. Okay, so the company rule lasted from 1773 to 1858. So we will study this today, where in which we will study the Regulating Act, Amending Act, Pitt's India Act, and Chartered Acts, and etc. Okay, so let's see historical background. So let's start. The Britishers came to India in 1608 as traders in the form of the East India Company, which had the exclusive rights of trading in India under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I in 1600. Okay, so what happened was, like we all know that Britishers arrived in India in the form of East India Company. Like they were traders, they used to do trade in spices and everything. So they established a company in India where they will, like through the silk route, they will, do the trade and take spices from India to Europe and everything else. So for this, the Queen Elizabeth, one of the British Empire, granted the charter to the East India Company so that the Britishers or the East India Company have the trading rights in India. Okay, so that this company can trade in India. Okay, so then in 1970, sorry, so next in 1765, the company which till then had purely trading functions obtained the Diwani, that is the rights over revenue and civil justice of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. So what happened was, like from 1608 till 1765, the company which was East India Company had only trading functions, like they were having like trade relations, like the business operations, like import, export, and everything, and they were only having the control over the company only and all the servants, and that's it. Like not the real territorial powers and like rights and everything. So now what happened was they obtained the Diwani. Diwani is what? Rights over the revenue and civil justice. So now what happened was, through this Diwani, the rights over the revenue and civil justice of the territories, which were these territories Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. So in this Bengal is considered as like West Bengal and East Bengal. So at that time there was no Bangladesh, so only Bengal was there. So Bangladesh plus West Bengal plus Bihar plus Orissa, and in that Bihar, Jharkhand was also there. So it was a huge area which was under the British control or the East India Company's control for revenue and civil justice, and like they were having all the rights, like how to run all these things. Okay, so this started its career as a territorial power. So now the East India Company has the territorial power as well to, like how to get taxes over these things, and how to like the functioning of courts. So here it is mentioned civil justice and everything. So all these things, like we are having a district level courts and everything. So this is what civil justice is all about. So they were having control over these things at that time. So in 1765 till 1765, they gained this much power. Okay. So now what happened was, in 1758, in the wake of the Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governance of India. So what happened was, in 1857, we all know that the famous first independence war was there, like the 1857 rebellion, in which a lot of people and like super mutiny was there, and uh, We know a lot of Lakshmi Bai was there. She fought a lot of wars with Britishers and everything. So what happened was this war, or we can say as this woke, um, or this revolt, just changed everything. And then, like earlier from till 1858, like everything in India was in the control of company. Okay, so now what happened was 1850, from 1858, the control over India, or the governance, or the administration, and everything came under the British rule. Okay, so this rule continued until India was granted independence on 15th August 1947. So we were having this rule, or we were under the control of Britishers, or we can see as British Crown, till our independence on August 15, 1947. With independence came the need for a constitution. So with independence, obviously, like any country gets independence, they need a constitution, so that how the country will run and everything else, like systematic way. Obviously, a country will run in a systematic way. So we will need a constitution. So which was the need of a constitution? Hence, a constituent assembly was formed. So for this purpose, a constituent assembly was formed. Purpose for this purpose in 1946. In 1946, it was formed, and on 26 January 1950, the constitution came into being. So what happened was, from 1946 to 26 January 1949, I'm repeating, from 1946 to 1949 of the 26th November of 1949, the constitution was written, and on 26 November 1949, our constitution, some of the provisions, or we can say some parts, came into being, like the citizenship or the fundamental rights, some more, like a little bit of things. So because of that, like, and we all know, like 26 November is also our constitutional day celebrated, and 26 January 1950, our whole of the constitution came into being. So this is how. So on 26 January, we celebrate the Republic Day. So for this occasion, we chose, and also 26th January has a deep meaning inside it. So actually, what happened was 26th January 1930 was chosen as our first Independence Day. Earlier, like we will gain Swaraj there. So what happened was we didn't get that due to some reasons. So then we got our independence in 15 August 1947. So after this day as 26 January was chosen to celebrate the Republic Day. Okay, so next let's see. However, various features of the Indian Constitution and polity have their roots in the British rule. So what happened was a lot of rules and regulations and a lot of acts were given in the British rule itself. In the form of, like, we have a Government of India Act of 1935, which laid a foundation for our constitution, and a lot of things are taken from that act. And we have constituted, or we can say we have created our constitution the best. So we have taken a lot of good things from each and everything, and we can even say, like, the you know from where we have taken our constitution, and like from Ireland, from Russia, from Soviet Union, or from America, from UK, and from different countries and places, we have taken their good things and assimilated in our constitution and made the best constitution and the lengthiest written constitution of the world. Okay, so what happens is, next, there were certain events in the British rule that laid the legal frameworks for the organization and functioning of the government and administration in the British India. So what happened was, like, we are having this UPSC commissions and presidential and a lot of governor posts and everything. So these posts were like made, or we can say these were the functioning of government and administration. Like, actually, these things were created by the Britishmen in India, and these were like certain things which, like, after the independence, we thought, like, yeah, these are good posts and we can keep this. So we kept that pieces, or we can say places with us, so that things can go really well and the administration of India can be run in a peaceful way and in a productive way. So what happened was, next, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam granted Diwani to the company after its victory in the Battle of Buxar in 1764. So what we have studied over here, in in 1765, the company, which till then had purely trading functions, obtained a Diwani, that is the rights of the revenue and civil justice of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. So, who granted them the Diwani rights? The emperor was it was the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam, who granted the Diwani rights to the company, to the East India Company, because the company or the Britishers won the Battle of Buxar in 1764. So, so after winning this war, the Mughal emperor thought, okay, let's give them some rights, and let's do a deal, and we both will work. So this is how they gained the rights and everything. These events these events have greatly influenced our constitution and polity. So obviously, like Britishers, laid the foundation, and everything, how a governor is going to work, how civil servants are going to work, and everything. So obviously, like, we are going to study everything in detail in our constitution and in our polity. So they happen to greatly influence these things. Okay, so they are explained here in a chronological order under two major headings. Okay, so all the like whole of the British period is divided into two parts, major two parts. First is the company rule, which we are going to study in this video, and the second one is crown rule. So we will study that in our next part. So let's first study the company rule. Historical background of the Indian Constitution. So what happened? Let's see. The historical underpinnings and evolution of the Indian Constitution can be traced to many regulations and acts passed before Indian independence. These can be summarized under two heads, which we have already seen. The company rule that started after British was granted Diwani rights post its victory in the Battle of Buxar, obviously, which we have seen in 1764, and in 1765, like, they gained all these Diwani rights and the like the administration and territorial power over the areas. Second is the Crown Rule, started after the revolt of 1857, obviously, like, after the revolt of 1857, the company was not able to run properly, so the crown took over. Next, so this is a timeline which I'll be providing you. You guys can take screenshots if you want it, and let's see. This is very important, and some things are missing. Maybe our editor didn't got it, but let's see. So in 1600, arrival of British as traders in India. So obviously the East India Company, EIC. Here I have written East India Company. So arrival of Britishers happened in 1600. In 1765, grant of Diwani rights to East India Company by Shah Alam. Obviously, that happened after the Battle of Buxar. Okay, so then in 1773, Regulating Act came. Then in 1781, the Act of Settlement. Then we have 1784 Bits India Act, 1813 Charter Act, and 1833 Charter Act. Then 1853 the Charter Act. Okay, so what happens is these Charter Acts. So these all, like, Charter Acts are, like, I have a trick obviously. So these Charter Acts are four actually. One is missing here. So what is there is, like, charter acts are char. Okay, so in Hindi we say charter or char. Okay, so these charter acts are four in number, and every charter acts has a difference of 20 years between them. Okay, so that's how you can remember. One charter act happened in 1793, so you can remember it was between Pitt's India and Uncharted Act of 1813. Okay, so remember like that. Then the revolt of 1857 took place. Then the Crown Rule took over by the 1857 Government of India Act. Then we have three Indian Council Acts of 1861, 1892, and 1909 respectively. Then we have 1919 Government of India Act. Then we have 1932 Communal Awards. Then we have 1935 Government Act of 1935. Then we have in the last 1947 we have our Independence Act. Okay, so this all things come under the Crown Rule, and these all things, the earlier things, these comes under Company Rule. Okay, so today we will study the Company Rule. Let's see the next. Okay, so here we have our Company Rule from 1773 to 1858. So first we will study the Regulating Act of 1773. Okay, so let's see. Okay. So we'll now study the company rule. The company rule started from 1773 till 1858. Okay. So what happened was this was the time period, and then comes the Regulating Act of 1773. So this act was of great constitutional importance, obviously. So it was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. So what happened was when the Britishers arrived in 1608 till 1773, all the like functions or all the stuffs related to the East India Company all were taken by the employees only. So what happened was they were taking bribery, corruption, and they were having even their private businesses in India, and like nobody was paying attention in the company, and they were like trying to do all the corruption and bribery, and like nobody was paying attention in the company that companies running smoothly and everything, so nothing was happening. So what happened was in 1773, the British government controlled and regulated the affairs of East India Company. So now the British government had some control or regulations over the East India Company. So now the servants or the employees were having some sort of restrictions from doing their private businesses, and so this was the first step taken by the British government. So this was the regulating act by which this thing was taken care of. It recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company. So what happened was now the company gained some political or administrative functions, all sort of territorial functions were there, and they had rules and regulations. So this is what the regulating act of 1773 is all about. So it laid the foundations of central administration in India. So now what happened was like there were different presidencies, Bombay, Madras, Surat, and like different. So now what happened was a central administration system was started from here. So now everything was done by the Bengal, the Governor General of Bengal. Earlier, what happened was the governors of Bengal, governor of Bombay and Madras, like different were there, and everyone used to have equal powers, and used to regulate or see all the functioning of the particular area. But now what happened was the centralization of the powers happened, and everything like the governor of Bombay and governor of Madras came in the they form subdivision of the Governor General of Bengal. So we will study the features of this act. First, it was designed the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal. Like earlier, what used to happen, like every province or the major province like Bengal, Bombay, and Madras having each one having their governors, respective governors. Okay, so now what happened was Governor General of Governor of Bengal was renamed or like designed as Governor General of Bengal was made. Okay, and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. So what there were 5 members. First were the Governor General of Bengal. He was having the absolute power or the most power, and then a executive council or a group of 4 members were there so that they can assist him in taking like the decisions and like how to control the territory and everything. So first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. So first Governor General of Bengal was Lord Warren Hastings. Okay, second was it made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidency subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal, as I already said. Unlike okay, so polity where the three presidencies were independent of one another. Okay, so earlier there were like every presidency, like the Bombay, Madras, and the Bengal, every presidency's governors were independent of one another. But now what happened was governors of both Bombay and Madras were subordinates to the Governor General of Bengal. Okay. So the third one is it provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774. So, comprising of one Chief Justice and three other judges. So, what happened was our first Supreme Court of India was set up at Calcutta in 1774. Okay, which was having one Chief Justice. So now our Chief Justice is Sanjay Khanna. Earlier it was D.Y. Chandrachud. So and three other judges. Like there were four judges. First one was Chief Justice and three were other judges. Okay, to see the civil affairs and everything administrative functions, not administrative but to provide justice and everything civil or criminal cases, how who will deal with that and everything. So the Supreme Court was there. Fourth, it prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents or bribes from the natives. So earlier, what used to happen, like before the Regulating Act of 1773, the like the servants were taking bribes or doing private trades of their own, and like they were taking presents from the natives and like to the do the job and doing corruptions. Even now it happens, like if a lot of things are there in the mainly the rural India, it still happens. So what happens is, like there is a long line is there, and we want our things to get corrected very soon, so we provide them bribe. Actually it is prohibited, but still it happens, and we should not encourage it, but it used to happen. So like people used to give them bribes and corruption and everything, like do this our act and everything. So people in the like power take bribes, and from the motives things go wrong. But actually taking bribery and everything is wrong, so we should not appreciate that, we should condemn it. Then the fifth one, it strengthened the control of the British government over the company by re- by requiring the Court of Directors, governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil, and military affairs in India. So what used to happen is the Court of Directors were there. Okay, so before the act, the Court of Directors were there and the governors were there. So what used to happen is they used to enjoy a lot of power and do all the things by their own. They used to handle the civil, military, and revenue affairs by their own. No, no one used to report it over like to anybody else. So now what happened was through this act, they used to report all these revenue, civil, and military affairs of India to the British government. Okay. So now next, let's go to our next one. Okay. So then comes the Amending Act of 1781. So earlier it was 1773. So now comes the Amending Act of 1781. It is also known as the Act of Settlement. Why? We will see it right now. Okay. In a bid to rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773, the British Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of Settlement. Okay, so what happened was in the Regulating Act of 1773, there were some problems or like defects were detected. So through this act, those defects were like changed, or we can say corrected. Okay, so that's why it is also known as Act of Settlement. Like there was some wrongdoing, so now it is settled. The features of this act are as follows. It exempted the Governor General and the Council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the acts carried out by them in their official capacity. So what happened was the Governor General of Bengal and the Council, like there are four members council is there, right? So these people were exempted from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Like all the things, like if the Governor General and the Council does some mistakes, so, so the Supreme Court cannot challenge it. Okay, are you getting? So what happens is if they do anything wrong, then the British government will do something, but Supreme Court has no power to, um, you know, what we can say, like to give justice to others or anything, like try them in the trial. There is no such capacity of Supreme Court here. Okay, similarly it also exempted the servants of the company from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official actions. So what happens is, like if the company servants does something wrong when they are in the company, or like they are serving something or official actions of a company, like like maybe collecting some revenues or taxes. If they do something wrong, then also the Supreme Court cannot challenge it. Okay, and Supreme Court doesn't have a jurisdiction over it. Okay, then second one is it excluded the revenue matters and the matters arising in the form collection of revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So as I already um, told, the revenue matters and the matters arising collection of revenue, like whatever the things is, like the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction of these things. So it provided that the Supreme Court was to have jurisdiction over all the inhabitants of Calcutta. Okay, it also required the court to administer the personal law of the defendants, that is, the Hindus were to be tried according to the Hindu law and the Muslims were to be tried according to the Mohammedan law. So what happened was the Supreme Court was having the jurisdiction over the inhabitants, or what we can say as the local people. Okay, not the companies, servants, or like the Governor General and the executive councils and everyone. Like not everyone. It is just the inhabitants. Supreme Court is just to provide justice to the inhabitants, or we can say the local people, not those. It has no jurisdiction over it. And here, the Hindus were tried in the according to the Hindu law, and Muslims were tried in the Mohammedan law. So what happened was Bengal was one, and in the West Bengal, majority of Hindus used to live, and in the East Bengal, so now it is Bangladesh, a lot of Muslims used to live. So everyone was like tried, so in their own religious laws. Okay, then comes it laid down the appeals from the provisional courts would be taken to the Governor General and Council and not to the Supreme Court. So what happened is, so like provisional courts we can say as the district courts. So these courts, after these courts, so if we want, we can take our our appeals to the Governor General. Okay, and if we want, and in council as well, and not to the Supreme Court. Okay, so Supreme Court doesn't have that thing with them. Okay, it empowered the Governor in general in council to frame regulations for the provisional courts and councils. So what happened was, now the Governor General and Council would make laws and regulations for the lower courts, like the provincial courts and the council courts and everything. Okay, let's see the next one. Now comes the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The next important act was Pitt's India Act of 18. Sorry, Okay, so now we will study the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The next important act was the Pitt's India Act of 1784. It was introduced in the British Parliament by the then Prime Minister William Pitt. Okay, that's why his surname is Pitt, so that's why this act is called Pitt's India Act. Okay. So the features of this act was it distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. So obviously, like this is very simple. Like commercial were different and political functions were different. So it distinguished mainly. Okay. It allowed the board of directors to manage the commercial affairs, but created a new body called the Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. Okay, so there were court of directors who will manage the commercial affairs of the company, and there were a new body that was board of control, which will manage the political affairs. Okay, so this was called a double government. It empowered the board of control to supervise and direct all operations of the civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. Like the board of control will, like supervise or advise the you know and direct all operations, like everything will be handled by the board of control, all the operations of civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. So the board of control will supervise all these things. Thus this act was significant for two reasons. First, the company's territories in India were for the first time called British possessions in India. Okay, so this act was very important because now the territories of India were called British possessions. Like this was the first time, like our territories were called British possessions, and the second was British government was given the supreme control over companies' affairs and administration in India. So from this act, British government was having a supreme control over all the companies, that is the East India Company's affairs and administration of India. Okay, so let's see the next. Okay, so now the Act of 1786. So this is just a small act. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. He placed two demands to accept that post, which were he should be given the power to override the decision of his council in special cases. He would also be Commander in Chief. Accordingly, the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both the provisions. So what happened was in 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. So when he was appointed as Governor General of Bengal, he wanted to make sure like everything is up to his, like standards and everything. So what he wanted was he wanted like special power, or he wanted like supreme power over everything. So he wanted that he should be given power to override the decision of the council in special cases. So what happened, used to happen was there was a Governor General of Bengal and the four executive council were there. So what happens was, like if a Governor General make some decisions and the executive council says no, then the like decisions were overridden, and like then the Governor General's voice was not heard. So what he wanted was if he should be given absolute power, and like he could override the decisions of the company, or we can say the council. So he wanted everything to be done by his standards and everything. So he would be the commander in chief. Okay, so that he will tell everything, like how things will happen, and like he will be the commander. Okay, so accordingly the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both those provisions. So for Lord Cornwallis, and like to provide him with all these powers, this Act of 1786 was made. Okay, let's see the next one. Charter Act of 1793. So, from this act, we can say Charter Act of 1793. The Charter Acts were there, and each were having a gap of 20 years. So, if you want to learn or you want to remember how to, like remember, like, you know, if you are not able to remember the years, this is a very small trick where you can, like learn their word charter. So in Hindi, char, char, char means four acts of 1793. First we will remember, and each having gap of 20 years. So second will be 1813, then we will have 1833, then we will have 1853. So this is how our charter acts are there. Okay, so first charter act of 1793 has features. So these features are as follows. It extended the overriding power given to Lord Cornwallis over his council to all future governor generals and governors of presidencies. So, like in the previous act, we saw that Lord Cornwallis, wanted like the supreme power or the, like overriding power over his council. So this was then further extended to the further generals, governor generals, and governors of presidencies. Okay. Okay, so now it gave the governor general more power and control over the governments of subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. So the Governor General of Bengal was given more power by this. It was having power at that time as well, like in earlier acts as well. So now it was giving supreme powers over the presidencies of Bombay and Madras. Okay, it extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for a period of another 20 years. So, like, it extended the trade monopoly actually. So what happens is to, like, the company was like granted a like period like for 15 years or 20 years to like for trade. So now it was extended for 20 more years. Okay, provided that the commander in chief was not to be a member of the governor general's council. In this place he was so appointed. So the commander in chief will not be a member of the governor general's council if he is not appointed. Okay, then we have it laid down that the members of the board of control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of the Indian revenues. Okay, so the member of the board of control, like these and the staff, will be paid by the Indian revenues, like which we get from the India, like which the revenues which are collected from India. From that money only, these the board of control and the staff will be paid. Okay, so now we have Charter Act of 1830. So the features of this act are: it abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. That is, the Indian trade was thrown open to all British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. So what happened was, earlier only the East India Company was allowed to trade in India, but now from this, any British merchant or all the British merchants were allowed to do the trade. Earlier it was the trade monopoly. So we can say as there is a village and in which only one shop is there, and only like people only buy from that shop and no other shop is available. So that person has a monopoly. So the person can increase the price as well. So now if the price of a piece is 10 rupees, he can even charge 15 rupees for the price. So if there are a lot of different So we can say as like there is a village and in which like there is a shop and like that person is charging 15 rupees for one piece, but the real price is only 10 rupees because he's having a trade monopoly, right? Because no else in the village is having a shop. Okay, so if there are two, three shops in the village and there is competition in the village, then he is bound to charge only 10 rupees, or maybe he will decrease it like to 8 or 9 rupees only, so that the competition increases and everything helps. So earlier he was having a trade monopoly. Now when the competition is there, the trade monopoly is gone when the competition is there. So that's how these things work. Like earlier only the East India Company was having the like trade trade. So earlier only the East India Company was granted the permission to do trade with India, but now all the British merchants were having that authority to trade. Okay, but the company continued the monopoly over the trade in tea and trade with China, right? These two things were still with like under the rule of the East India Company. The second is it asserted the sovereignty of the British crown over the company's territory in India. So obviously, like it increased the British crown's sovereignty or the control over the company's territory in India. Obviously, like the East India Company's territories were like Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. So, like they increased their powers here. It and owed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. So it owed the Christian missionaries, what we can say, because like this is how the Christian missionaries came to India, so that they can enlighten the people here and everything. So they can spread the Christianity here. Then comes it provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. So it provides Western education. So this is how the Western education was started in India, and the people started learning English and everything among the inhabitants. Obviously, the rural people and the local people which here. So obviously, they started learning like schooling in the Western education and everything. It authorized for the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish the persons for not paying taxes. So this is how the local governments used to impose taxes on people, and now also we are paying taxes and everything. So this is how things work. And like if someone does not pay taxes, then you have to punish that person. Okay, next. The Charter Act of 1833. Okay. So this act was the final step towards centralization in British India. So the features were it made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India. So now, who was the Governor General? Like the first Governor General was William Bentinck. So he was made, like actually he was the first one. So now the last Governor General of Bengal was made the Governor General of India. Okay, and vested in him all civil and military powers. Okay, so now he was having the Governor General of India was having all the civil and military powers. Thus, the act vested for the first time the government of India with authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. Okay, so who was the first Governor General of Bengal? First Governor General of Bengal was Lord Warren Hastings. Sorry, I was wrong there. Okay. First Governor General of Bengal was Lord Warren Hastings, and the first Governor General of India was William Bentinck. Okay. So now second was it deprived the governor of Bengal, sorry, Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. Obviously, the legislative powers from the governor of Bombay and Madras were, taken, and the Governor General of India was having exclusive legislative powers for the entirety of the British India. So now all those the legislative powers, executive powers, every power was given to the Governor General of India. The laws made under the previous acts were called as regulations, while laws made under this act was called as acts. Okay, so the laws which were made in the previous acts used to be called regulations, and now from onwards these will be called as acts. Okay, so the third one is it ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. So now it was having a commercial body, like it was for trade, right? So now it became an administrative body, and everything was under control, like the administration, execution, and legislation. Everything came under British and East India Company. Okay, it provided that the company's territories in India were held by it interest of His Majesty, his heirs and successors. So now all the territories of the company in India were held by, or these territories are of interest for His Majesty, his heirs and successors of the British India, like all the like the royal family of the British company and Britons. So fourth one is the Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for selection of civil servants and started that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office, and employment under the company. However, this provision was neglected after opposition from the Court of Directors. So this was the first, act, or we can say first, you know, first way to implement a system of like UPSC, and like the Indian people can rule India. So this was the first thing. So civil servants and like servants were employed in like from India in India. Okay, and it was opposition was like this thing was opposition by the Court of Directors, so it was not able to be granted. So next is Charter Act of 1853. So this was the last of the series of Charter Acts. This was the fourth Charter Act passed by the British Parliament between 1793 and 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. Okay. So obviously it was a significant constitutional landmark, so it is important. So make sure you know this well. Okay, the features are it separated for the first time the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council. So the executive and executive functions of the Governor General's Council were separated. It provided for the addition of six new members called legislative councillors to the council. Okay, in other words, it established a separate Governor General's Legislative Council, which came to be known as Indian Central Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the council functioned as mini parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. So now what used to happen? Like the Indian Central Legislative Council was established, where all the legislative, law making things and everything will be done here. So it was also known as mini parliament. Okay, it used to adopt the same procedures as the British Parliament, and because it was made from by the British people, so it adopted the same procedures as British Parliament. Thus, legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring special machinery and special processes. Okay, let's see, it is the continued part only. So, second feature is it introduced an open competition system for selection and recruitment of civil servant, like it is happening right now. The convenient civil service was thus thrown open to the Indians also. So earlier, what used to happen, all the like executives or administration level posts, everything were in British possession. But now the competition and the recruitment process and the selection process and everything was open to Indians also. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee, the Committee on the Indian Services, were appointed in 1854. So the Committee was appointed in 1854 for this whole. Okay. So next, it extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possessions of Indian territories on trust for the British Crown, but it did not specify any period unlike the previous charters. This was clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time the parliament liked. Okay. So now what happened was it extended the company's rule. So now the company's rule was extended and allowed it to retain the possessions of Indian territories on trust of the British Crown. So now what happened was, so the possessions of Indian territories which were there, the company's territories were there. So now they were, in possession of the British Crown. Okay, and it was like it did not specify the period and everything, unlike the previous charters which happened, and it was clear indication it can't terminate at any time after the Parliament. Like, okay, so this is how the things gone. Fourth is, it introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Central Legislative Council. So in the second, from the second feature, we can see that the competition was, like the open competition was introduced, and selection and recruitment of civil servants were there, and now the Indians could also participate in it. So now local representation is there also. Of the six new legislative members of the Governor General's Council, four members were appointed by the local or provincial governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. So now what happened was the legislative council was there, no legislative members were there, six new were there. So now four were of the Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. So these four, councils, members of the council were of the Indian descent. Okay, and the last one is, at that time the civil services of the company were classified into convenanted civil services, higher civil services, and unconvenanted civil services, lower civil services. The former was created by a law of the county, while the later was created otherwise. Okay, so this is how the things happen. This is our, company's rule ended. This is where the company's rule ended. In the 1853, the last charter was happened, and thereafter the 1857 revolt was there, and after that the crown rule started. So in the next slide we will see, or we can, in the next part we will see the crown's rule. And here I'm ending this video, and I will be, you know making the second video as soon as possible, and see you soon. Thank you.